I'm Manal Shquair from Palestine, and I'm the advocacy and campaigning coordinator of the Stop the Wall campaign. I will be facilitating this webinar titled "Walls in the Arab World: Repression and Division." This webinar comes the fourth in a series of webinars we kicked off with on November 9th, which to mark the International Day of Interaction for a World Without Walls. The World Without Walls campaign was launched in 2017 by Palestinian and Mexican movements in response to Donald Trump's ascendancy to power, where he promised to build a big, fat, beautiful wall on indigenous land at the borders with Mexico. And we launched the World Without Walls campaign as a space for people around the world who suffer from different kinds of walls and who try to free themselves from these walls of repression, discrimination, expulsion, and exploitation. It is just a space for them to exchange experiences of resistance and struggle and to empower themselves through that struggle. And the call for a World Without Walls campaign was and is endorsed by over 400 organizations across the world. Since the start, or since the launching of the World Without Walls, we've noticed that walls have become the phenomenon of our times, and this phenomenon is rising every year, and including in the Arab world. The Arab world is not an exception from that, because we see that authoritarian Arab regimes want to solidify their presence in power through building walls of discrimination, of injustice, and of repression. For instance, Morocco built the wall in Western Sahara in 1980, making Palestine not the only country in the Arab world struggling against walls. Also in Iraq, there are walls surrounding the city of Baghdad and Diyala, and the Saudi wall also is at the borders with Iraq. Tunisia has also started the construction of a wall of trenches and surveillance system at the borders with Libya in 2015. There is also Saudi Arabia in 2003, just 1 year after Israel started the construction of the Apartheid wall on our land in the West Bank. Saudi Arabia started the construction of a wall in 2003 at its border with Yemen. Instead of protesting Israel's construction of a wall in the West Bank, Saudi Arabia has just followed the footsteps of apartheid Israel. And then after a halt, Saudi Arabia resumed the construction of the wall in Yemen in 2015, which was coupled with military operations led by Saudi Arabia in Yemen, making that wall as a tool to make like victories in Yemen through that war. And this is just walls of the Yemeni people, make them die inside their countries, unable to flee and find refuge in another country. And that only reminds us of the situation of my people in Gaza, who are walled off by Israeli walls. And now Egypt has started recently constructing more walls at the borders with the Gaza Strip, making people in Gaza in the largest open air prison in the world die, while Israel brutally attacking them, unable to find refuge in an Arab country like Egypt. And these authoritarian regimes that build walls in the Arab world also normalize their relations with Israeli apartheid. We've witnessed since the last couple of months a wave of shameful normalization of relations between some Arab countries like Sudan, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates, normalizing relations with Israel. Some other countries have already before relations with Israel, but they are not yet formalized through deals. So these authoritarian regimes build walls and normalize relations with Israel, which only entrenches their power and their oppression against the Arab people, and also Israeli apartheid against the Palestinian people. And today's webinar is going to discuss the ArabWalls in connection to normalizing relations with Israel. And for that, we have three great speakers. I would like to introduce you to our speakers. Dr. Samia Botmeh from Palestine. She's the Dean of the Faculty of Business and Economics at Birzeit University in Palestine. And she's also a BDS activist. There's also Dr. Saad Akash. Dr. Saad is from Kuwait, and he's also a former professor and a researcher, expert in development, and a member of Kuwaitis for Jerusalem, supporting Palestinians and supporting the BDS movement. And our third speaker is Mehfud Bechri from Western Sahara. Mehfud is co-founder of the Remove the Wall campaign, which is an effort to mobilize international support for the Western Saharan people against the Moroccan oppression and occupation, including the wall in Western Sahara. So I would like just to let you know, the speakers and those listening to us, how the structure of the webinar is gonna be like. There will be three sets of questions. Three rounds of questions. In the first round, I will ask every speaker a different question, and they will be given 5 minutes, everyone, to answer that question the way they want, either through PowerPoint presentations or just giving a speech. The second round of questions is going to be only one question raised to the three speakers to have a kind of a round table discussion where they comment, add more in order to comment on each other's answers, or add more if they would like. And also the same with the last question. It's more of a roundtable discussion between the three speakers. First of all, to start with, I would like to ask Dr. Samia just to give us a brief overview about the apartheid wall Israel has started building in 2002 on Palestinians' land in the West Bank, in terms of the purpose of building it, its impact on Palestinians, and how it was used as a tool for de facto, and now it's being used as a tool for de jure annexation of large swaths of the West Bank. Dr. Samia, I give you the floor.
Sorry, thank you, Manal. I was just trying to unmute myself. Good evening, everybody. Not sure if it's everywhere evening, but yes, indeed, good evening. I just shared the presentation. Is it on, Manal? Can people see it?
Yes, we can all see it.
It's a brief thing, really. It's regarding the Israeli apartheid wall in Palestine. Just to provide you with some information about this apartheid wall, which started to be built in 2000, and the decision was developed in 2002. Briefly later, after that, Israel started building this wall. It actually follows not diligently, not strictly the what we call the armistice line, which is the 1967 borders of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Of course, this is the map of the West Bank that is shown here. The wall is actually part and parcel of a set of Israeli colonial measures that Israel introduced. And part of these colonial measures is to separate the West Bank from the Gaza Strip, which earlier started in 1994, then creating islets within the West Bank, which we see here in different colors. These are areas within the West Bank that are separated from one another through a system which we call A, B, and C. So 18%, this very sort of brown, orangish, yellowish color here, this constitutes around 18% of the West Bank. This is under Palestinian control. 22% of the West Bank, which is this faded orangish color, this constitutes 22% of the West Bank, and this is under partial Palestinian control. So Israelis and Palestinians control it. Mostly Israel controls the most significant issues within it, i.e. planning, zoning, natural resources. Everything else that has to do with the population is controlled by the Palestinians. So in terms of the space, Israel controls the land. And then the blank region, the white region, is totally controlled by Israel, and it's over 60% actually of the West Bank territory. Now the wall comes as part and parcel of this entire situation, in addition to these colonial measures whereby the West Bank is broken down into small areas, whereby the West Bank is separated from the Gaza Strip, and Israel remains in control of the most of the vital territory within the West Bank. We have the wall is introduced into this reality. The wall follows, as I said, not diligently, not accurately, the 1967 green line, which we call the green line, which is the sort of border between the West Bank and 1948 occupied Palestine. The wall actually confiscates land from the West Bank in a way, this land is annexed into what is known as Israeli territory. In terms of the length of the wall, it stretches over a territory of 770 kilometers. So this territory here is 770 kilometers, and it confiscates parts of nearly 45% of the West Bank. So it goes inside the West Bank to take more territory. Here it goes, if you follow the red line, it actually goes deep into the West Bank territory to confiscate more of this West Bank land. Here over Jerusalem, it goes well into the West Bank to take up quite a lot of the West Bank territory. So it is not just an apartheid measure, but it's a proper colonial measure. The proper colonial measure because it does confiscate land, and this land is then annexed by Israel. It also not only confiscates land, but confiscates resources, and resources, people rely on these resources essentially. And the resources that it confiscates, besides the actual land and agriculture that comes with this land, and we're a proper farming community, so people's livelihoods, people's lives are at stake here. What it also confiscates is water, because here on this is the western side of the West Bank, it's the water aquifer, because this is the hilly region of Palestine. So the water, the rain falls on the hills, the water ends up in these areas bordering the plains of Palestine. So the wall, actually, Israel's apartheid wall, confiscated 95% of the Western water aquifer. So it didn't just confiscate land, it also confiscated water that is needed to irrigate the non-confiscated land. So this, this 95% of the Western water aquifer actually accounts for 60% of the West Bank water. So here we have confiscation not only of land, but also of resources that are detrimental to the lives of the Palestinians. What the wall also does is it confiscates or it separates communities from one another. The wall actually here comes into the West Bank and breaks the northern West Bank from the central West Bank. So we have two separate territories. It's a very small, tiny area, but this tiny area is just broken down into small islets. And the wall works to isolate the West Bank territories from one another, but it also, in these areas that have been annexed by the wall, there are around 200,000 Palestinians that live there. So these 200,000 Palestinians are totally separated and sanctioned and isolated from the rest of their neighboring villages and towns. For them to communicate with everyone else, they have to get permits, they have to get exit allowances, which are extremely difficult to come by, and it makes their lives, I mean, totally isolated. It's like you're creating prisons for 200,000 people within their own communities. These are the visible direct effects of the wall, but of course the wall has also detrimental effects in terms of increasing the number of settlers, Israeli settlers. Settlers, I mean, in 1967, of course, there were no settlers in the West Bank. Now we have nearly 700,000 people, 700,000 Israeli settlers living in settlements inside the West Bank. And these settlements basically work to also confiscate land, work to confiscate resources, work to drive out Palestinians off their land, and to weaken and sabotage and lessen the resistance of the Palestinians. So the wall actually works to, Manal, please tell me to stop.
For interrupting you, yeah.
Okay.
Do you need a lot of time to
finish? No, just one sentence. Okay, great. Thank you. So the wall basically works as an enhancing mechanism for Israel's colonial expansion. It seems like, it's a wall. It's harmless. It's just, blocks of cement or fence in some areas. But the impact of this wall is detrimental. It enables Israel to strengthen its colonialism. It weakens the Palestinians' capacity to resist, to survive, to exist. So it's a proper colonial tool that is at the that is directed at the Palestinians to steal more of their land and enhance Israel's colonialism. Thank you, Manal.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Samia. I would like to move now to Mehfud. Mehfud, I would like you to tell us more about the Moroccan wall in Western Sahara. I mean, in terms of the purpose of building it, its impact on the Western Saharan people, and I would like also to give just like a kind of description or a definition of the wall in Western Sahara. How do you define it? Is it an apartheid wall, or is it a wall for expulsion, or an occupation wall? So we would like to know more from you.
Yeah. Thank you, Manal, and thanks to Stop the Wall also for the invitation and for giving us this opportunity. I mean, I always say that in the wall in Western Sahara, we have basically two walls. The first wall is the physical wall that is dividing our land in two, that is dividing our people in two, and that is being an obstacle to the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara, but also to the normal life, as we have some families separated between the two sides of the wall. We have like people dying every year from the impact also of the landmines that we have in that wall. So basically, I mean, all the bad and the very negative impact of a war that we can have in a world is basically applicable to the war in Western Sahara. So just yeah, I've prepared a short presentation so I can, but also for the best of the time, I mean, I can divide it in some parts. So I would like to start maybe if I can you see now my screen?
Yes, yeah, we can.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, so basically, I mean, the wall in Western Sahara started to be built by the Moroccan occupation after the occupation and annexation of Morocco to Western Sahara in the 1975 of last century. So this wall is meant to be like a defensive wall to the Moroccan troops, but also, I mean, it started to be to protect the Moroccan like soldiers, those who have annexed and occupied Western Sahara forcibly, but also now it protects Morocco that keeps plundering and exploiting the Western Sahara natural resources. But more importantly, I mean, the wall in Western Sahara is like being as a big impediment to the right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination, but also the right of the Sahrawi people to reunification with their families. So this the wall has started to be built by the king of Morocco, Hassan II, of course, as we know, advised by some allies at that time, and still, by the way, are still allies like Israel, the USA, and France. And this is why also, I mean, after the impact of the war that started between Moroccan occupation and the Polisario Front, which is the Sahrawi movement of liberation, and after the several defeats that the Moroccan army had at that time, so they came up with this idea, as I said, assessed and advised by the allies, and especially Israel and the United States, and they started to wall this very long wall that is still being. I mean, after more than 35 years, the wall of shame in Western Sahara is still there, and is still, as I said, also still having the negative impact on the people of Western Sahara in both sides of the wall. As I said, like according to the Sahara, and we might come to this later. According to the Sahrawi organizations for mine victims, more than 2,500 Sahrawis have died because of landmine explosions in both sides of the occupied and especially the liberated part of Western Sahara, as the wall contains more than 7 million landmines that I mean still keeps affecting the lives of people, but also their livelihoods and the livestock, because also the livestock of the Sahrawis, and we know that the Sahrawi people traditionally is a nomad is a nomad people, have been affected by these landmines and by this wall. As every year also we have like many livestock dying and having landmine explosions that take the lives of these animals. So in short, as I said, as I might, I mean, expand the different impacts of this wall next. In short, this wall has been like built by Morocco in the, as you said, first-hand Manal, from starting from the 80s, and it stopped like the building of this very long wall in the 1987, and from the years of the wall, as I said, more than 7 million landmines are currently like still in that wall and still impacting not only the life of the Sahrawis, but also, I mean, even the like even the environment there, as it's having a very negative impact, and even the livelihoods and the livestock of people living both sides of the wall. And unfortunately, this is one of the very silent walls, as we rarely I mean hear about in the media, as we rarely hear speaking about that wall. So this is an opportunity, but we hope, I mean, that it's not gonna the last one, because we really need to bring attention on on what negative impact the wall of shame in the Moroccan wall in Western Sahara is having. And especially, I mean, it's very sad that Western Sahara has come again to news only because a new war has started there. I mean, as the world was really neglecting this conflict, the last colony in Africa, Western Sahara, was totally forgotten, both by the United Nations but also by the international
Yeah,
community.
Mahfoud,
And yeah, I might be giving some like more
yeah,
details in the
I
next
wanted,
of the
yeah,
conversation.
exactly. We have like other questions, and maybe you can highlight that in the next question. Thank you very much. I'd like to end the first round of questions by asking Dr. Saad. Like Dr. Saad, you listened to Dr. Samia and to Mahfoud talking about walls and the impact of these walls. And at the beginning, I also mentioned the walls that are being built in the Arab world. I would like to know more from you. Like in your opinion, how do these rising walls in the Arab world serve as a tool to consolidate Arab division and the influence of imperial and Western powers in the Arab world, given the fact that Mahfoud, sorry, had just mentioned that it was like Morocco was advised by the US and by Israel to build such a wall in Western Sahara. So how does that consolidate Arab division and and imperial and Western powers in the Arab world?
Manal, I think we have two types of walls. We have the physical walls. We have the mental walls. The mental walls that exist and have existed among the Arab people. And it had been part of the colonialist mentality to put these and structure this in such a way that the division between the people, instead of being one nation, have developed into political entities, so-called states, and thus behave each according to what they think is their interest. This has to be recognized. We have to take that into account in planning any struggle for the future. It is therefore important in every country to build the civil society that can communicate with other civil society. They have a lot in common in the struggle with the brethren in different parts of not only the Arab world, but the whole world. This has been made so clear in the last round of Trump and Netanyahu, and playing on the fears of some of the country to support and normalize a relationship with Israel, because there is a fear in Bahrain and UAE from Iran, and in their mind, that's a bigger danger than Israel.
Yeah.
While in Sudan, I think the case was basically a blackmail, if you want, money or you want to lift up sanction, you have to recognize Israel. But this exactly what may facilitate this type of incursion into the solidarity of our world, because we have regimes that are not answerable to people. They are answerable to a ruler or a group of beneficiary, and their interest, momentary or otherwise, can dictate their policy. On the long term, of course, that will all disappear, because in the final analysis, no matter how much recognition Israel gets from any part of the world, as long as it cannot work with the Palestinian people, then there will be no peace. There will be no solution. So, at least in Kuwait, where we have a very strong civil society, and we have groups that have existed for a long time, mainly because we are a democratic country, and movement of...
Dr. Saad, sorry for interrupting. Sorry for interrupting you. It's really an amazing answer, but we're going to touch on the response to normalization and walls later on, if you can wait for that.
Okay.
Is that fine? Great, thank you. Just, I forgot to mention at the beginning, for those listening to us, if you have any questions in mind, please write them in the chat, and then at the end of the discussion, our speakers are going to address them. So feel free to ask any questions you want in the chat. Thank you. So the second round of question, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a kind of a roundtable discussion. So I'm going to raise one question for the three of you, and then you have like discussion. You expand on the answers as the way you want. And my question is, which Dr. Saad has already mentioned about normalization. My question is, how does the wave of normalization between some Arab regimes and Israel solidifies both Israeli apartheid system and the authoritarian Arab regimes, including Morocco as an occupying power of Western Sahara? Dr. Samia, I would like to start.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, the normalization, the new wave or the latest wave of normalization does solidify oppression. I mean, be it in Palestine or elsewhere, I mean, the Western Sahara, because normalization, basically what it does, it labels oppression, colonialism, apartheid, violation of human rights, all these atrocities, it labels them as normal. So these become accepted as a normality. And by recognizing all these crimes against humanity, crimes of violating people's rights as normal, then we are actually endorsing all these crimes. We are actually providing justification for them. We are saying it is fine to be colonial. It is fine to be oppressive. It is fine to practice apartheid. So normalizing with Israel at the moment is normalizing all these forms of violations of human rights. Accepting Israel as a normal country and engaging in economic, political cooperation is endorsing colonialism and apartheid. And of course, I mean, for us as conscientious individuals, institutions, civil society, people around the world, we can never accept oppression as normal. We can never endorse apartheid as a justifiable system of operation. And for that, we resist. And part of our resistance is to clarify to people where these issues are going wrong, and then working together to put an end to such forms of normalization. We are all against oppression everywhere, whether it happens in wherever it happens in the world. So we need to unmask it, we need to clarify it, and then we need to work together. And this is why it's important to know about all these movements around the world. It's important to build these relations, and it's important to work as a strong power to overturn oppression and all the forms that it takes, um, be it oppression of leaders of their own people or across nations, as in the Palestinian context. And this is basically the significance of this webinar. It actually empowers us. It actually enables us to work together. So it is very important to put an end to these normalization, and not just to stop at that, but to actually turn the table over, in the sense that it's not just to stop normalization, but actually to resist it, to end it, to stop it. And we have many examples in history that enable us and allow us to work together to achieve that end. Thank you.
Great, Dr. Samia. Dr. Saad, sorry for interrupting you. You were talking about normalization. I would like you to expand more on this and how it solidifies Israeli apartheid and the authoritarian Arab regimes, especially because Kuwait as a government and as a people, they clearly against normalization with Israeli apartheid, because as you mentioned, it's a democratic state. So there is a connection between the Arab regimes being authoritarian and normalizing with Israel. So I would like to hear more from you about that.
But before that, I would, and I'm sorry because I have lived through, in my 73 years of life, through many situations that I recall when I first went to the United States in 1966, not many people supported the people movement in South Africa. On the contrary, most of the people in Europe, in the US, all over the world, recognize the state of South Africa, and cooperation did business there. And when we try to talk and educate people about that, we were met with either total ignorance or total unacceptance. What I'm trying to say is this: although it's a setback to have a few governments normalize, quote unquote, with Israel, it is not a setback to the movement, because the movement is long. And the struggle is with the people, not with the governments. I realize it is, for us in the Arab world, we had thought that the Arab world is one solid entity, but it's not. It is, it's a states and different state of development, and with a lot of the regime that rules are repressive toward their own people as much as the colonial power might be. Putting that aside, let's talk about what the normalization that occurred, because, as I said, of fear of certain regimes of Iran, and the amount that the Netanyahu, Trump put into trying to make that effort seem possible only by normalization. It is not unknown fact that some of the regimes supported even the election of Trump in 1918, in the 2018, 2016, I'm sorry. But the way to work it out through is by developing the internal societies, civil societies within these countries. This is the base that we have to reach. Because as I would say about Kuwait, Kuwait has a long history of supporting the cause of Palestine. It's an integral part of the thinking of the people. So we have no problem between the government, the people, the civil society, the different political grouping in Kuwait, all recognize the right of the Palestinian people for in their land and for their undeniable rights. But we have to work something out similar to every country. We have to advocate. We have to play the role that movement have played in changing the thinking in the whole world back to support the Palestinian by boycotting Israel, by boycotting the goods, by boycotting all normalization of it. I think this is the solution, and this is the way we should be working. I don't know if I answered you. Manal?
Sorry, I was muted. I'm sorry. That's really a great answer, Dr. Saad. I would like you, Mehfud, to expand on that, especially because Morocco, the country that built the wall in Western Sahara, is the country that is occupying Western Sahara, that caused the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Western Saharan people living in refugee camps in Algeria. So, and we all know that Morocco has long-standing relations, the open secret collaboration and relation between Israel and Morocco. So how do you see the normalization with Israeli apartheid as a way to consolidate, like, both the authoritarian Arab regimes, particularly in your context, Morocco as an occupying power, and Israeli apartheid at the same time?
Yeah, I think it's very, I mean, it's very necessary and very needed to separate between two things. I mean, the peoples, especially in the Arab world, the peoples and the authoritarian regimes that we have in most of our countries. So basically, I mean, those countries, and because, I mean, because of the weakness, I mean, they are trying to find a way for them to, I mean, to continue really ruling. And that's not possible unless they have got a big support like they are trying to get from US of Donald Trump. And of course, maybe Biden would not be that much different, especially when it comes to the Palestinian cause and when it comes to supporting and protecting Israel. So basically, Morocco have always have, I mean, this kind of under the table relationships with Israel. What happened is that in the last like few years, I mean, Morocco have been leading a big effort in order that in order to get something, I mean, something as to do after doing the normalization with Israel. And this is what Morocco have been negotiating for so long. Too many reports, too many press reports have like officially said that Moroccan officials are like starting talks with the US responsibles, with the Israel responsibles, so that they can get a false, let's say, a recognition on a false sovereignty over Western Sahara. And I think, and this is what we are seeing now, a confusion amongst Morocco, especially after, I mean, the events of last day. We all know that, I mean, a new war has started in Western Sahara. Morocco has violated the ceasefire that was auspiced by the UN in 1991, and then Polisario reacted, declaring officially that it's no longer committed to that ceasefire, and that the war will start again in Western Sahara. Morocco is still not recognizing that the war is happening, and is still waiting for this kind of international support. And the confusion also of Morocco comes because Trump did not get a second mandate, and it was about to make it official in the very soon, I mean, as soon as possible, to to be, I mean, joining the Arab countries that have normalized relations with Israel. But what Morocco was trying to negotiate is what it will take, and Morocco is pushing to take like this like recognition for a false sovereignty, as I said, as the UN doesn't recognize, and no country basically in the world recognize Moroccan sovereignty on Western Sahara. So I think, I mean, the relationships between Morocco and Israel are like of now clear, more clear than ever, and only those blind ones who don't want to see, I mean, those relationships would, I mean, would deny, I mean, this relationship. But I just wanted to add like a few very interesting things which I said in the very beginning. Our fight, I mean, and also for Sahrawis, but also for Palestinians, is the fight of people, but is the fight for justice, is the fight for democracy, is the fight for human rights. And unfortunately, most of our regimes in the Arab world doesn't represent those values. And this is why it has to be double the responsibility on social movements. It has to be double the responsibility on the people, on the grassroots movement. And this is why at least we as Sahrawis have tried for many, I mean, time now to get a joint like a response and a joint effort by the Sahrawi civil society, by the Palestinian civil society. But we have, because we have too much in common. We have an external occupation. We have a wall that divides our land. In the UN, our cause is recognized as a self-determination cause. We have an occupying power. We have someone protecting this occupying power in the international scene. And basically, we have too much similarity that should push us to get together and to fight together against those injustices that we are seeing. But not only in Western Sahara and Palestine, we have to do this everywhere. As Dr. Samia said, I mean, this is the cause, and this is fight for justice, for freedom, for human rights, and normalizing relationship with apartheid regime in Israel is only cementing the situation of the human rights violations, of injustices. But we don't have to wait until regimes and until governments react to this. It's the responsibility, and it's our duty, and it's our mandate to go and fight against this from the social movement and from the grass movement. Otherwise, nothing is going to change, especially if we are waiting to those governments to react against. We all have to remember that apartheid regime in South Africa was also supported by many governments, and they did not want to find I mean, they were finding excuses for this authoritarian regime and this apartheid regime. However, the people of South Africa make things, and thanks to the resistance, they won the apartheid regime and established the anti-apartheid regime in South Africa. So this, if we have to learn something from this, is that we need to join, we need to unify our efforts, and we need to get together as civil society, as a grassroots movements, and as people, especially to defend those values, because those values are at stake. And if we don't show up against them, if we don't resist against those who oppress, those who violate human rights, those who occupy, we are not gonna prevail, and we're not gonna arrive to a just world and the world that we have dreamed of for so long.
Great, Mahfoud. I think you took us to our last question, the third and the last question. And it's also going to be kind of a roundtable discussion, because you touched a lot on resistance, and that was my question. I mean, how do you, like every one of you, envisage resistance from where you are? What do you think are the next steps that should be taken to live in an Arab world without walls? I mean, practical steps in order to fight back against normalization and against walls. Dr. Samia, would you like to start?
Yeah, that's a grand question, Manal. In a way, I mean, no, it's fine. It's fine. I think in a way, I mean, each one of us here talking about individuals, but also civil society and countries at large, we strive towards the same values. We strive towards justice, freedom, liberation, self-determination. We strive towards equality, democracy. So all these notions are common to all of us. We are in the Arab world, we are quite lagging on many fronts. Some of us have been able to, make a few steps. Others are struggling really badly. We're struggling on our internal Palestinian front, and we're struggling against Israel, and that's the case actually in the rest of the Arab world at various levels. I think it's important to bring everyone together in a way. I think moral resistance is very important to remind people of these values. They're very basic, they're very essential, but people have been very much engaged in following technology and media and so on. So people have very much forgotten these basics, the importance of struggle, the importance of the notions behind struggle. Why do you struggle? So it's important to actually remind ourselves of that. I mean, when UAE normalized its relations with Israel, and then Kuwait actually stood against that, it was extremely important for us as Palestinians. It was a stance by Kuwait to say we are anti the normalization process. This very small moral position of Kuwait was extremely important for supporting our struggle, because it actually, in a way, enabled us to understand that there are others who support and stand in solidarity with our struggle, and that in itself is important. So I think it's essential to actually remind ourselves of the basics again. What are we all striving towards? It's very important to build bridges amongst ourselves, to struggle together and not to just rely on ourselves. We are much stronger as groups of people, as groups of institutions, as peoples. We're actually very powerful as peoples of the world. So that all of that has to be sort of revitalized. It always existed, but has to be revitalized. Also, mechanisms of struggle, building links and relations with the rest of the world. Latin America, it has huge learning experiences for us. The struggle of the Latinos against American imperial power over the past century, with all its successes and failures, bridging also and connecting to movements in North America, in Asia, that are all striving towards the same values. We each also define our own set of resistance and struggle mechanisms. And for us at the moment as Palestinians, it's very important to stand in solidarity with the mechanisms that we have set, including the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, because that is an example whereby it's not just the Palestinians struggling here on the land in Palestine, but also each and every one of us around the world can actually be an active part of this resistance and struggle movement. So building connections, striving, reminding ourselves of what we are striving towards in our struggle, and reorganizing and remobilizing towards achieving these objectives, while we strengthen the steps that we take at each point is hugely important, and not to really underestimate the significance of all these issues coming together.
Great, that's really such an amazing and inspiring vision for a future without walls. and more resistance, Dr. Samia. Dr. Saad, would you like to comment on what Dr. Samia has just said and address the question from different angles?
Well, of course, I basically agree with what Dr. Samia said. For us here in Kuwait, we define our roles in number one, in the case of Palestine, is support of the Palestinian people in every way we can. This requires work always. You have to keep the society informed. You have to keep the society on track. You have to keep the coalition, the political coalition between the different direction, whether they are Islamists, they are progressive, they are whatever. You have to keep them all believing and that support of rights is number one. Of course, as a human being, I believe in the human rights of everybody. All humans are entitled to the right of self-determination and freedom. But for us in Kuwait, you cannot do everything. We are emphasizing the case in Palestine. And these two organizations I belong to, Kuwaiti Union Al Quds, Kuwaitis for Jerusalem, which means in support of Palestine, and a local chapter of BDS here. Will continue to work because also the continuing education must have. Regarding other stuff, we have to keep our society moving toward more freedoms, more democratic behavior, because that's also a part and parcel of moving in the right direction. The only thing I hope we get out of this, that networking is essential, as Samia said. We have to solidify the interaction between people who seek freedom and justice all over the world, but also to realize the struggle is long, it's not short. And we should not be ever discouraged because of temporary setbacks. These are bubbles that will disappear. All the effort of Netanyahu and Trump will disappear. What's more important is to reach people and to solidify the people base. Finally, I believe also in emphasizing economic development in the areas that we are trying to make, be able to resist the suffering that's continuous. It is important that we, as much as possible, help NGOs inside of Palestine to be able to continue and be able to support the people. That's all. Thank you.
That's amazing, Dr. Saad. It's just like the stance of the Kuwaiti people, and what you've just said gives us more hope. And I would like to hear more from Mehfud. And Mehfud, yeah, it's the same question: how you envisage resistance? How do you envisage mutual solidarity and exchange of experiences of struggle between Palestine and Western Sahara and other countries, of course, suffering from wars?
I think it's very important to recall always that we fight for the same values, and basically this should be enough to unify us in order to fight together. So basically this has always been our message, and therefore we should stick to it more than ever. And also we should have in mind that this is a very this should be a very long term fight, because we are fighting for something that is sacred for for we are like fighting for humanity, we are fighting for human rights, we're fighting for freedom and democracy and equality for everyone. And therefore this should be the enough motivation for us to continue and to go for this. So my message always have been that, I mean, there have been a lot of things done here and there and everywhere, and this is quite good. But I think, I mean, more than ever, we should be more unified, and we should like also, like Dr. Saad was saying, I think the importance of networking, because each one of us might benefit from others' networks. For example, I mean, the Sahrawi people solidarity movement is huge in Spain, in France, in Italy, and other parts. At the same time, the movement of solidarity with Palestine is also huge and very big. But what if we unify all this like solidarity movement to do like concrete actions and to do like unified efforts against, I mean, against the occupation, against human rights violations, against like repression, but also repression not only in Western Sahara and Palestine, as you said, repression everywhere. So we are fighting for some like values that if that are at stake in the places where we are, like in Palestine, we have like all the discriminatory like discriminatory policies that are done by the Israeli occupation. At the same time, in the Western Sahara, we have like a brutal military occupation that have been occupying with force Western Sahara, and not only that, they have been like violently like intervening against civil activists, and we can see how nowadays like Moroccan army and Moroccan police are intervening violently against human rights activists and against civilians that that are taking the streets in order to protest and in order to condemn the Moroccan I mean the Moroccan reaction on what have happened in the south of Western Sahara last day. So I think, I mean, in short, also I just wanted to make clear that human rights are universal and these values are universal. So we should fight for them everywhere. Where we should fight for them in Palestine, we should fight for them in Western Sahara, we should fight for them in Kashmir, we should fight for them everywhere. And even, I mean, in those countries where there is like kind of stability and we have like this kind of oppression, I think we have to stand against that. So this is something that needs to guide us. So it's basically not acceptable to like defend, for example, to defend, I mean, some values somewhere and like turn a blind eye on them on the on other places. I think, I mean, and this is something I'm speaking as a Sahrawi, this is something that we have suffered from for so long. We have seen like how our fight, how our cause, how our resistance have been basically forgotten from everyone. And we have been like starting from the Arab world, how the Arab world have given us like their back and have let us basically alone and have always supported the regime, the Moroccan regime, the Moroccan occupation, and have always got and embarrassed this kind of positions of Morocco, and they have never given like any denouncement to human rights violations, to like facts that are happening in the ground and that very big human rights organizations are speaking about. So on the Arab world, especially, I'm speaking about regimes. We have never find any ally. We have never find something that will listen to us and that might give us our support. But always our hope is in people. Our hope is in masses. Our hope in like civil society organization, in grassroots movement. And we believe that it will come the day when we have like Palestinians together with Sahrawis, together with other peoples that believe in freedom, believe in democracy, believe in human rights, and we will get the day when we will be unified and struggle for those values and for those objectives to happen everywhere including in Western Sahara, and it may be a good like opportunity to remember that nowadays we are living also tensions in Western Sahara, especially after resumption of war, but also we are living a very barbaric human rights violations in the occupied cities of Al Ayun and Dakhla and everywhere. And this needs everyone to stand, and those people, those civilians needs everyone to stand with them, and this everyone to speak up about them, without fearing any represalias. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahfoud. I hope that this webinar has been an opportunity to convey the unheard voices of the Western Sahrawi people in the Arab world and in other parts of the world. I have a question before we finalize. I have a couple of questions to our speakers. The first question is to Dr. Saad. And yeah, the question is, what is your information about the conflict in Western Sahara and how people of Kuwait, sorry, I lost the question. I'm so sorry, yeah, what is your information about the conflict in Western Sahara and how people of Kuwait see the conflict, Dr. Saad?
Well, me personally, I've always supported the rights of the people of the Sahara for self-determination. I believe that is the basic human rights that have to be granted to everybody. And it upset me, it saddened me that the government of Morocco have played a repressive role into what should be a fraternal people and prevented the right of self-determination to be exercised. But to speak in general about my society, I'd have to admit that the knowledge is not general, it's not common. You have to admit that the distance between the east and the western part of the world makes sometimes an isolation. And I have to admit that most of us have not worked very hard to bring all the causes that can be brought into the attention of the society. It's something maybe we could work on in the future. But as a person, as for me, I've always supported and will continue to support the right of the Sahara people. I don't, as all of us agree, you cannot distinguish between rights. The rights are common to everybody, not only to Arab people, but to all people in the world. And I will stand for the right of any group of people for the right of self-determination. And that's what we should work on, is that networking.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Saad, for your answer. And I have another question for Dr. Samia. So the question is, yeah, Dr. Samia, Dr. Saad was talking about support for economic development. And as an economist, Dr. Samia, which kind of economic development do we really need?
I think we need forms of development that empower the masses rather than empower capital. In the sense that we need to, I mean, I always propagate that in my educational classes, to actually work on issues of production, you know, to encourage production. if we look at history, colonialists always attack production. I mean, the British destroyed production in India. The French destroyed production in North Africa. This is what colonialists do, because production is the backbone of economic strength and power. And that's why Israel, the first thing it did in 1967 after it occupied the West Bank, but also after it occupied Palestine in 1948, because our struggle with Israel is not just in relation to the West Bank. That's very important to keep, that Israel colonized the entirety of Palestine, is to actually destroy all forms of production, because production is not an economic act. It's a social, political, and economic endeavor. And hence, it is very important to empower people, and it's very important to, in a way, listen to the voices of people in terms of empowering them. You want to empower them economically, listen to their voice, listen to what sort of choices they want to make, and in a way support that form of economic empowerment they are after. It's difficult to actually in a way revitalize production, not just in Palestine, in the entire region. Production has declined, be it production in agriculture, in production in manufacturing and industry, but mostly also the most recent form of production is technology. We're very poor technologically. We import and use technology, but actually we're the least producers of technology, and hence we're at the mercy of the rest of the world. So it is very important to revitalize this production. It's about revitalizing the politics of the region and not just the economics of the region. It's very important not to just encourage consumption and consumerism in any form or type. And we can support each other, because we do have in the region, our population base is huge. Our capacity to innovate and develop is also huge, but we have to create the conditions for that and work together again. It's another area whereby you achieve more justice and proper human rights for people. So, I mean, that's the brief answer to that very significant question.
That's great, Dr. Samia. It really gives insight into how to have more sustainable economy within a settler colonial context. Thank you very much. I have one last question for Mehfud. And my question is, like with Palestine and Western Sahara, the United Nations have passed many resolutions without resolving anything. Is the UN a useful tool for people, especially because you touched on that in your speech?
Absolutely not, in short. So basically, for the Sahrawi people, I will give our example, and I know it has been the same for Palestinians and for other peoples. I mean, we have seen and we have witnessed how the United Nations have become an absolute like useless tool for the world. We know that United Nations have been established and like for some values, and among them the right to peoples of decolonization and self-determination. But we know also how the United Nations in the recent years have become a tool in the hand of strong powers like the United States, like the France, and like basically other countries that now are manipulating the United Nations and using them for their basically for their own interest in the Western Sahara. And after 16 years of war, the United Nations intervened, and when they intervene, they come with like a peace process in which the parties of the conflict have both accepted, the Polisario and the Morocco, and then the United Nations have like brought a mission which we call it like Blue Helmet mission, the United Nations mission for the referendum in Western Sahara, MINURSO. But that mission has been, and it was, I mean, the only mandate was to first to monitor the ceasefire and then to organize a referendum basically in the next year. And basically what MINURSO have been doing is like spending a lot of money, because we know that the funding for the United Nations missions in Western Sahara is basically high. We can just give you like an example to know how much this like mission is spending of money of the United Nations every year. I mean, the funding of the UN mission Western Sahara, I mean, is double the funding of all like humanitarian response and humanitarian funding to Sahrawi refugees in Algeria. So, and they're only like less than 100 staff. So basically the UN mission Western Sahara have been unable to fulfill its mandate, which is the organization of a self-determination referendum for the people in Western Sahara. That was supposed to happen in 1992. I mean, 1 year after the or even only few months after the ceasefire was put in place in 1991. We have seen how the UN mission Western Sahara became also a tool in the hands of like big powers, like even the occupying power Morocco, but also behind Morocco, France and others. So the only like objective now of the MINURSO, especially for the last 29 years, have been to maintain a totally unacceptable status quo. And the status quo, the only one who is is negatively impacted by this status quo is the Sahrawi people. Sahrawis are under very difficult conditions in the refugee camps in Algeria, in the southwest of Algeria, but also they are living human rights abuses and repression on a daily basis. And we are living now new episodes of this repression in the occupied zones of Western Sahara. So the only one who is benefiting from the status quo is the occupying Morocco, because it continued to plunder and exploit the human rights resources of Western Sahara, and it continued to violate human rights in Western Sahara. And when the suggestion and the initiative of to add human rights mandates among the mandates of the MINURSO in Western Sahara came in 2013. Basically, by the way, it was brought by United States, but at that time, I mean, like countries like France and other countries, they have totally opposed to this opinion. And we can see like the only mission that is unable even to protect or to monitor human rights is the MINURSO in Western Sahara. So as I said in the very beginning, in short, the United Nations have become irrelevant to the conflict in Western Sahara. And we can see now like how things have started, have basically got back to point zero. And now we have like new hostilities going on in Western Sahara, and the war basically have started. And this means that the UN mission in Western Sahara and the UN in general have nothing to do right now in Western Sahara, unless like those who are controlling the UN, I mean, come to the conclusion that this conflict have to resolve it. So I think at that moment, this conflict can be resolved and Sahrawis can be given the right to self-determination. I mean, otherwise, I mean, it's only a waste of time, a waste of funding, and absolutely nothing in the ground.
Great. Thank you very much, Mahfoud. And I think that the fact that the UN has been proven to be an ineffective tool at all for having like kind of resolution for the human rights violations that continue either in Palestine, in Western Sahara, and other parts of the world. I think this emphasizes the fact that our hope should be invested in the peoples and the joint struggle among peoples around the world. And now our webinar comes to an end, and I would like to thank you, our great speakers, for their insightful and amazing speeches. I would also like to thank the interpreters who made it possible for other peoples around the world who don't speak English to listen to us. Jumana, Iziskan, and Louis, thank you very much. And of course, I'm really thankful for Marin and Oscar for their technical support. I would like to pay your attention that we have more upcoming actions as part of the World Without Walls campaign till the end of November. So for more updates and information, please follow up on Facebook, stopthewall.org, on Twitter, and you can also visit our website, www.stopthewall.org. And last but not least, although we Palestinians and other people struggling against walls are being spatially and temporarily confined by these walls, but the Arab unity and the solidarity of the people and their support is our hope to actualize what we reimagine as part of our reality, to live in an Arab world without walls, which is also part of a world without walls. Thank you.